Well, good morning. Good morning. If you will, please open in your Bibles to Exodus chapter 2, and we're continuing our series, The Gospel of Exodus. We call it the Gospel of Exodus because I want us to start thinking different, that these Old Testament books, they're pictures of the gospel. They're foreshadowing of the gospel that we're going to see unveiled as Jesus comes. These are pictures of what's going on there, of God redeeming a people. And also I want to say Happy Mother's Day. Gentlemen, if you've not yet said it, you need to get on that. I'm not offended if you pull your cell phone out and start texting mom and grandma and all those things. It's a little late in the day, but you can still get on it. But I kind of lay the series out, and I had no idea that this sermon would fall on Mother's Day. I'm not that clever or that witty, but I love how God just sovereignly works these things together. This morning, we're going to be studying two women in the life of Moses, both of his brave mothers. He has a birth mother and an adoptive mother. So let me quickly set the scene in case you weren't here last week. Israel is in slavery in the land of Egypt underneath the paranoid Pharaoh. Fearing their growing population, the Pharaoh decides that he needs to do something to decrease their numbers so that they don't overthrow and kill them or enslave them, because there's so many Israelites, there's so many Hebrews. So his first plan is to make their slavery so hard and unbearable that they're just going to die off. That doesn't work, and they increase in number. So the next one is he tries to get the Hebrew midwives to kill off all the male boys. Well, they don't do that, and the number of Hebrews grow, and God's blessing them still. And finally, he tells the Egyptians, when you see a male boy, go throw him in the Nile. All the newborns are to be killed. So this is the world that Moses is born into, a world of fear, a world of oppression and death, but also a world in which God has been silent to the Israelite people for over 400 years. But even though God is silent, he was sovereignly working, both preparing a deliverer to bring them out of Egypt into the promised land, but also in that 400 years, he's using those people in the promised land to cultivate fields and build homes. And they walk into homes and cities that they did not build, and vineyards that they did not plant. God is doing things in the background. And through all of this, that's when he brings Moses. Moses is going to be the tool that God uses to deliver the people of Israel. But before we ever get there, Moses has to be delivered. And through the bravery of his mothers, we see the hand of God preserving these covenant promises. So if you will, look at the screen. This is what's true, the kind of theological principle for the morning. Excuse me. God is working sovereignly through faithful people who trust him with the results. God is working through people who walk in faith and say, God, I trust you with the results. So what do we need to do? We need to be a people who walk in faith and trust God with the outcome. That's super easy to say on a platform out loud, but that's hard to live out. So we're going to look at the lives of these people as they do it this morning. So look at verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took his wife, a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket and made of bulrush and dabbed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the river. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughters of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and while Her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her servant woman over to see and took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of water." So let's look at our first point for the morning, being brave enough to trust God with the results in verses 1 through 4. That's what we see in the life of his mother. So verse 1 seems relatively unimportant because it's kind of a bit of biographical information. And remember, Moses is the one writing this. He's written the book of Genesis, and he's writing this story about his life. And the people of Israel have already been released. The law's been given. The Levitical priesthood has already been set up. And his brother Aaron is the high priest. And only a high priest, or only a Levite can be a high priest. And what he's doing is he's showing them that Aaron and Moses, they've been holding this position of spiritual leadership over Israel for all these years, and they have the right to because of their lineage. So that will come in more importantly later, but it's important for the text. Verse 2 now introduces to us a problem. This woman, who we learn her name is Jochebed, she gets pregnant and gives birth to a boy. She knows as soon as the Egyptians find out that this boy's been born, they're going to kill him. So verse 2 gives the reason that she hides him. And it says, "And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months." It makes it seem like they're keeping him alive because he was a fine, healthy boy. Commentators suggest a better translation would look something like this, linguistically. "She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. Longing to have him or keep him, she hid him for 3 months." That makes a lot more sense to me because it's a mom of a newborn. She's longing to be with that baby. So she's going to do whatever she has to do to stay with that baby. This is why she's even brave enough to defy the king. Now you might be thinking to yourself, this woman's tough. Where's her husband? Is she even lying to him like, "Hey, it's a girl"? No, that's not what's going on. Hebrews 11:23 talks about him, even though he doesn't show up in this passage. It says, "By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict." While the father he's participating in this also, but the story is about the mother. They were not afraid of the king's edict because they were driven by their faith in God and God's promises. By faith, God's promises were more important than Pharaoh's rules. By faith, they valued the life of this baby, who is an image bearer of God, over the commands of that man. They were brave enough to trust God with the results of rejecting the king's order. And fear has been the driving factor of the first chapter and a half of this book, right? So Pharaoh feared the Israelites, so he's been trying to figure out how to decrease their population. The midwives, they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh, so they wouldn't kill the babies. Moses' parents, they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh, so they they rejected the king's order too. And I think this is a good place to stop, because whether we recognize it or not, fear drives a lot of our actions. And the question you need to ask yourself is, where will you let fear drive you? For instance, remember, we define fear as being not afraid of authority. That's not the right way, but understanding authority and living in the reality of the consequences. For instance, when you were in school, you wanted good grades. You feared having a bad grade, so what would you do in response? And I'm not saying you were afraid of bad grades. In this sense, you feared bad grades. So what did you do? You studied, and you got the good grade, or you didn't, and you suffered the consequences and got the bad grade. We fear the government, so we follow its rules. We fear our families going hungry, so we work hard to feed them and to house them. And this is this idea of fear. Fear is a motivator. And if we fear God and we do these exact same things for his glory, we get to trust him with the results. Because I fear God, I do my schoolwork well. Because I fear God, I serve the government and I'm a good citizen. I do my work to the glory of God. It changes everything because we don't have to fear not feeding our family. Instead, what we do is we just trust God with the results. Fear is walking in the reality that God is in control. That's the fear of God. And a lot of our bad decisions are based out of fear. For instance, you feared the bad grade, so you decided to cheat. Some of us, maybe you lived in a home where the most important thing you could do was earn money when you got older. So everything else, you put everything else to the wayside, and the most important thing in your life is the pursuit of gaining money. And that $1,000 is not enough, that $100,000, that $1 million, it's not enough to make it till you die, and you just live in this fear, and you're pursuing that over everything else. Or some of you maybe grew up in a family where you didn't really have any value unless you got married. And so you feared being alone, so you quickly got married in a relationship that you knew was going to be bad. Like fear is a motivating response for us to do things that ultimately are bad decisions. But when we live in fear of being unwanted, unliked, not needed, not enough, an outcast. We fear missing out on things. And when you let those kind of fears drive your decision making, what you're going to do is you're going to walk into sin. Letting fear lead us makes us make bad decisions. But in Christ, when we fear God, we find that we are free from all these things because we're accepted by God. We are wanted by God. We are loved by God. It flips everything on its head. When you allow fear to lead you, then you are going to find a boldness because you care more about the edicts of God than the consequences of this present age. Being brave enough to trust God with the results will free you to walk in boldness. So why 3 months and not longer? Verse 3. She hid him for 3, she could hide him no longer. Well, I remember when we had our first child, I thought we weren't going to sleep that first month. But unless a baby's sick, they pretty well sleep, right? At least that first week, they're sleeping a lot. And unless they're colicky or something like that. But as they grow, they start needing more attention. They want some more, they want you, they're needing to cling to you. And this baby had got to the point to where she couldn't hide them anymore, even if she was taking them out in public. So we've got Piper. I think y'all heard her talking in the back earlier. Piper's 9 months. But when she was in that first 3 to 4 months old, we were having to put bows on her so that we could take her out in public so that people wouldn't be like, oh, he's so cute. It's no, she's a girl. That's why there's a bow on her head. But let's be real. Babies look like babies. you can't really distinguish them. That's why when they're born, we put them in blue outfits and pink outfits so people don't walk up to you and be like, that's a really cute girl. It's like, no, that's my son. We don't like that, right? So we try to give. But after that, like they start looking masculine or feminine. You can start seeing these features. And I'm saying this is that point where Moses started looking like a little boy. And she needed to do something with him before the Egyptians noticed him and they did something themselves. So Jochebed has a plan. Instead of allowing them to throw Moses into the Nile, she would make him a small basket and hide him among the reeds. So what she makes for him is less of a basket and more of a boat. The word is actually tiba. And it's the same word, it's translated every other time in the Bible as ark. Even the construction of the vessel points to Noah's ark. Moses' ark wasn't constructed with gopher wood like Noah's was, but it was constructed with what she had. She had papyrus, and they sealed it with this pitch, just like in the story of Noah. I think Moses, remember, he's the author. He's drawing this comparison between him and Noah. Both men are delivered through death by water. Both men God rescues, and God uses them as rescuers. Noah ultimately rescues humanity by taking his family on the boat as well as all the animals. And God uses Moses to rescue the Israelites from the hands of the Egyptians. So this is going to really ruin some good TV for you. But I grew up in the time of the Prince of Egypt. I don't know if y'all saw that movie about Moses. But, what she does is she puts them in this basket and she just sends them off. And it looks like a Viking burial. Like she just sends them off into the world, and he's going through the mouth of these crocodiles and stuff, and boats are rowing over him. And don't want to ruin it for you. I just don't think that's what happened. I think she's hiding him and taking care of him. Let's look why. Look at verse 3. She put the child in it, talking about the ark, and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. So she doesn't just push him out into the wind. She takes him to a very specific place and puts him there. And he would have been locked into this structure, this basket, not exposed to the elements. He would have been closed in like Noah. I think that's the idea of the ark, is that it's covered. And he was put in the reeds by the riverbank. So the word put has this idea of intentional placement. If the river took him, then it would not be accurate, right? If she just pushed him off and it took him where it may. And also, how is this young girl going to keep up with the current of the river as this basket floats down it? That doesn't make sense either, unless that's like the slowest river ever. So she puts them in the reeds. So I think so that she can come back at different points in the day and attend to them, and at night probably go spend long periods of time because she would have had that availability. So that's what I think's going on. Now the most popular option is she knew where the Egyptian women bathed, and she put them over there, hoping that they would have pity on them. But in my mind, that makes the least amount of sense, because what would be more terrifying than putting your baby with the very people who the Pharaoh has sent to kill the babies? The Egyptians. So that seems less likely to me. It seems like he has a better chance with the crocodiles than the Egyptians. So either one you take, that's fine. But I think she's placed them there, and she's coming back to take care of them. I think Miriam, that's Moses' sister, she's noted here. Excuse me. And I think she's the centurion. I think she's on guard over this basket. Now, she's not up on it. She's way back. She's looking to see what happens to it. I mean, Jochebed couldn't do it because if she's hanging out by the river all day, not doing her job, somebody's going to know that something's up, right? And this girl also, just a little bit on who Miriam probably was, she had to be young enough that she couldn't be the mom of this child, because if they found the child, they found Miriam, what's going to happen to Miriam? She's probably going to die. So I don't think Moses' mom would put her in that kind of situation. But also, Miriam had to be young enough that she didn't have a job, because these people were slaves. They didn't just get to do what they willed, right? So people think that she's between probably 6 and 11, 6 and 13, somewhere in there. And this is what it says at the end of verse 3. She put the child in and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank, and his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. So when you read the Bible, remember these are real people in real places dealing with real things. Moses' young sister could have stayed by the river without bringing any suspicion to the things that were going on. Can you imagine how hard it would be to leave your 3-month-old son in this basket thing in the reeds of the river and have your other young child off at a distance watching it just to see whatever happened to it until you could come back and attend? Like, we're in the little baby stage, and we have these monitors, and they're set up in the baby room, and we walk to the other side of the house. We got the monitor in our hand to know what's going on. Could you imagine going and having to live your life and do your work not knowing what's happening all day to that kid? That had to be gut-wrenching. But she was brave enough to trust God with the results. Just like Moses' parents weren't afraid of the king's order, they knew that Pharaoh had no power beyond what God allowed, and he couldn't touch their soul, even though he could touch their bodies. This is the same, in my mind, logic that they're using when they leave that child there, because they know that God's not going to allow anything to happen to that child that's not in his will. And this makes us uncomfortable because sometimes it's God's will that things that we don't like would happen. But we still have to be brave enough to trust God with the results. Moses' only hope for survival was getting him away from their home so that the Egyptians could not find him. So they hid this 3-month-old in the reeds of the Nile. Jochebed was brave enough to let the child go and to trust God. If she didn't surrender control, Moses 100% would have been killed. If she didn't surrender control. That moment that she placed that child in the river is this ultimate act of surrender. That's a brave faith. I think this is the picture of trusting God with the results. And that's being brave enough to let go of the things and people that we treasure the most and trust God with them. And since it's Mother's Day, I'm going to talk to moms for a minute. Moms, y'all, you know that feeling of slowly relinquishing control over your child. But you have to let go and trust God with it, or the baby's going to be stunted, right, in life. Whether it's letting them go to that feeling when you let your child go to preschool that first day, or giving them the keys to the car. I'm telling you now, that's the one I'm not ready for. Or relinquishing control as you send them off to college. Watching them walk down the aisle. Or when they're old enough, letting them go explore the world. But moms, you need to understand, you're called to be faithful with what God has entrusted you with, and then in turn, entrust Him with their lives. You must loosen your grip and trust that God loves your child even more than you do. I mean, we've also seen the negative cases of what happens when moms hold on too tight and they don't let go. Whether it's a child that they're now an adult and they should be grown up and spreading their wings, and instead we have one of these failure to launch situations. Or, I love that TV show, Everybody Loves Raymond. You know, the in-laws are way too involved in Raymond's marriage, and that marriage is stunted. And I mean, Raymond is a grown-up emotional child, right? He's got no faculties to make an adult decision because he's been so smothered by his mom. The reason we control is because we want better for our children, right? But when we over-control, what ends up happening is we make their lives much worse. You must be brave enough to let go of them and entrust them to God. When you hold on too tightly, we choke out and we suffocate the very thing that we love. We need to let go in faith so that we can make room for God to work in their lives. The bravest thing that a mother can do is to trust God with her children. And this definitely applies to more than just moms. I mean, I see it with dreams. You know, we have these giant ambitions and goals for life. And these may even be things that come from God, that God's placed in our hearts. But we want to control every aspect of this thing and how every detail is worked out until we eventually, we stunt the thing, we stunt the dream, we stunt the growth because we won't give God room to act. Whatever it is that you treasure, if you want it to grow, turn it over to God and trust Him. Turn it over to God with open hands, saying, kill it if you want to, or let it grow if you want to. Give it to Him as an offering and see what He does. And you know what? He might kill it, and if He kills it, that's making room for something else. So let's look now at verses 4 through 8. Brave enough to take the opportunity that God gives. So Pharaoh's daughter is bathing in the river, and she sees this thing floating over in the reeds, and she tells an attendant to go see what that thing is. And when they open up, they find this baby in there crying, and they bring it to her, and she has pity on that child. The women immediately recognize it's a Hebrew boy instead of some abandoned Egyptian boy. And again, real people, real place, real time, real things, real cultural stuff. They say it's a Hebrew. They know it's a Hebrew because Hebrew boys were circumcised. So immediately they know who it is. There's no question about that this child should be dead. But they have pity. And can you hear, we've all heard how women start talking when there's especially a brand new baby in the room. Their voices get a little higher. And they start cooing and talking to the baby. And you know, the baby's crying. So, oh, he's crying. He's dirty. He must be hungry. I don't know what the conversation was, but whatever it was, Miriam felt like there was an opportunity to speak. Remember, Miriam's hiding. She's off. And she speaks up. I mean, can you imagine that these women, they're down there in the water with this baby, and all of a sudden this little Hebrew kid pops up, hey. And she starts to speak. Verse 7. She says, shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse this child for you? And the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Miriam, Moses' sister, I want y'all to notice this. Did they ever say, hey, young girl, come here? No. She asserted herself. She spoke out. And because she spoke out, commentators believe that Moses' mother was able to raise him for up to 3 years before having to send him back to the palace. Miriam was brave enough to take the opportunity that God gave her to assert herself. When the baby was found by the authorities, what most people would have done, but this girl understood the power of the Egyptians. She understood that she was in danger because this boy was found by her. Most people would have turned and ran. But instead of using the fight or flight, she chose fight. She didn't run. She put herself in potential harm's way to speak up, and God used it. Now, Moses' mom, because she lived that way, because she did that, because she was brave, now Moses' mom doesn't have to sneak around to feed the boy and to hide him. She gets to, with the stamp of the palace, she gets to bring that boy out in broad daylight. All because, first, Jochebed was brave enough to trust God, and Miriam was brave enough to take the opportunity that God had given her to assert herself. So Miriam, she goes home to get mom. We make this all like super happy. Everything about this is happy. But process with Moses' mom real quick. Hey mom, they found Moses, or they found the baby, and I said, I know a lady that can nurse him, and they sent me to come get you. I mean, kids are easily manipulated, right? How did Moses' mother not know that, how she didn't know that when she went down there, they weren't going to kill her and kill the baby, and then go kill Aaron, the other son, and kill Miriam, and kill the father for hiding this kid to make an example out of him. She didn't know that. She didn't know that this wasn't a trap. But Moses' mom was brave enough to take the opportunity that God gave her at great risk to herself, and she trusted God with the results. The baby Moses, who was under the death penalty by royal decree, now has received a royal protection because his mom took a risk and trusted God. She got to raise him in his early years, and she was even paid for it. The princess paid her wages for nursing the baby. And the princess eventually formally adopts Moses, and we know that because she gives him an Egyptian name, which is Moses. You know, you hear these stories about moms, there's a wreck and their kids are inside, and the mom goes and she lifts up the car to get the baby out or something crazy like that. One of these extreme situations of adrenaline. I think this is a very similar experience to Jochebed marching from her home to the palace. It took tremendous strength and courage to do this. She was willing to give up her life for a chance at giving that baby a life. That's a picture of a mom right there. And moms, you guys are tough, you're fierce when it comes to protecting your babies. Now, she trusted God with the results, but this didn't work out how she wanted it to work out, right? She wanted to raise her baby his whole life. But that's not the plan that God had for Moses. When you trust God's sovereignty, you can be brave enough to take risks, but because He's in control, He's in control of the outcomes, even outcomes that you don't want. But God's plan extends way past the moment that you can see. I mean, at the end of that 3 years, or at the end of that nursing, when she took that baby back, could you imagine the tears? I mean, that had to be heart-wrenching. But we can trust this promise in Romans 8:28, that even though these things don't turn out the way you want, God has a promise. For those who love God, all things work together for good. This is good that he goes to the palace. For those who are called according to his purposes. Jochebed didn't have any idea what her faith would do. She didn't know that God would use Moses to lead the people out of Israel through the Red Sea to the promised land. She didn't know that the only greater prophet that would ever come would be Jesus, the God-man. She didn't know any of these things, but she was faithful. She trusted God. And because it didn't work out how she wanted, Moses got an Egyptian education. He could read, he could write, he learned to lead people. He knew what it was to live in that society and what made them tick, so that when he came back to lead Israel out, he had a platform and he had a voice and he understood what was going on. Let's look at this last point real quick. Brave enough to have mercy. Let's talk about the Pharaoh's daughter. She is not a Yahweh worshiper, but she's brave enough to defy the king and have mercy on this baby. God uses her pity to save Moses and ultimately to save Israel. She adopted that boy and gave him a shot at life. God doesn't just use believers to carry out his will and to carry out his purposes. He uses unbelievers too. One of my favorite proverbs is Proverbs 21:1. It says, the heart of the king is a stream of water in the hands of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wills. God moves men to accomplish his purposes. We see God tell Moses whenever he's sending Moses back to free Israel that Pharaoh was going to harden his heart and that God was going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Both of those things are made known before it ever happens. God used the hardening of Pharaoh's heart to cripple the greatest power in the world so that he would be glorified through it. God uses believers and unbelievers alike to carry out his purposes, like Pilate and the high priests during Jesus' execution. God's will was accomplished through them because Jesus had to be executed, and he used these men in all their sin and all the nastiness that they were doing. He used them because it was his will that the Son of God be crushed for the sins of man, that man might have eternal life and be delivered from sins. She was brave enough to have mercy even at the expense of potential wrath of Pharaoh. God is going to give you opportunities to show compassion, to show mercy to people, but that's normally going to come at a cost. Think about the story of the Good Samaritan. You remember how Jesus set this story up? He said, which one of these men loved their neighbor? Which one of these men showed compassion? And he says there's this man, he gets robbed on the side of the road. It's this Jewish man, he gets robbed, he's left for dead. And as time goes, these different men walk by, and there are these different kind of religious rulers and people who are very high esteem, very important men. And one by one, they just walk on the other side of the road. They go around. They see him, but they understand that it's going to cost them something to show compassion to this man. It's going to cost them their time. It's going to cost them money. To help him would have cost them social equity. They would have had to be ritualistically cleansed to deal with the man and his blood, so they couldn't go in the temple and couldn't participate in whatever kind of worship ceremony they wanted to for a while. They would have missed out on things they wanted to do. But the Samaritan, who this other guy would have counted as an enemy, he counted the cost, he showed compassion, and it cost him time. It cost him treasure. It cost him his money, and he showed compassion. And this is the example for us. For some of you, when we see people in need, what compassion, what mercy looks like is physically giving them some money or giving them some food. It's going to cost you something. For a lot of us, we just see people in need in our neighborhoods around us or people in the church, and you look at the mess they're living in, and they just need your time. Maybe a little sweat equity, maybe just an ear to talk to, and that's a cost. Or maybe compassion for you looks like finally giving forgiveness to that person who doesn't deserve it. They haven't sought it from you. They've only been nasty to you. They're still being nasty to you, or they're just avoiding you. Maybe compassion and mercy looks like you just giving them forgiveness. But what's that going to cost you? It's going to cost you having to let go of that grudge that you're holding on to so tightly. But to live as Jesus lived, to walk in the way, to be a Christian, is to show compassion. Because who were we? We were poor, we were needy, and we were enemies of God. Before Jesus came to us, we need to understand that we're nobodies. We are nobodies that God would look at us and find and have compassion towards us. But while we were yet sinners, Christ came to us so that he would purchase our pardon, so that we would not have to face the wrath of God. But instead, we are adopted heirs. We get eternal life. And I love this picture of adoption here. And adoption is a beautiful picture of the gospel, because God saved us not to be servants, but to be sons and daughters, to be seated with him in heaven. God might be pricking someone's heart here with considering adoption, but you might be asking the question of, what will this cost me? First, adoption's very expensive. That's a real hurdle, that's a real cost. But let's be real. You're asking the questions like, what if there's something wrong with them? What if there's something mental? What if there's something emotional? What's the cost going to be to my family if we bring this other person in? Following God and showing compassion will cost you something. But if he's moving you towards that, be brave enough to say yes and trust him with the results. We don't know what the what ifs are. Leave the what ifs with God and just be faithful. Like I said, when I planned this, I didn't know that this would fall on Mother's Day. And it's crazy that the first chapter and a half of the book of Exodus is about women and mothers who are protecting life. Exodus, in my opinion, is the greatest picture of redemption in the Old Testament, as God unfolds the story of his ultimate redemption in Jesus, culminating on the cross. And God's using this story of women to drive forward, pulling Israel out of slavery. And this is what I want to encourage Mom with this morning. Mom, don't lose heart. Your labor is not in vain. You don't see the full picture. You don't see the tapestry that God is weaving. He's not invited you to let you see the whole picture. All he's done is he's put threads in your hand, and what you are to do is to be faithful with those threads. He doesn't show you how the whole picture is going to work itself out. But this is what you can know. He is always working. He's working even in the diapers, the dishes, the 500th time that you've disciplined your child that day, possibly that hour. He's working on those dark nights when you're desperately in prayer over the life and the soul of your child. He sees you and he knows your faithfulness. Don't lose heart, because the days are long and the years are short. Be faithful with the moments you have, even the not so glamorous moments. God's plan for you might feel hidden. It might feel small. You may even feel forgotten, Mom. But he's doing something massive in your work. Your work is something of eternal consequence, because it's for the soul of your babies. And if you're faithful in your work and your children grow up to receive Jesus and put their faith in Jesus, your work is something that will echo forever in eternity. How will it echo forever in eternity? Because those children will grow up to be men and women, and whenever the Lord takes them from beyond the veil of this life into eternity, they will forever stand around his throne singing to his glorious name. Your work is an eternal work. So, Mom, what I want you to feel is the weight and the responsibility to raise your children and your grandchildren in the fear of the love of the Lord. So this is what I want you to consider. Right now, and what he already has you doing, right in the middle of all the mess that we live in, as we walk in this ordinary faithfulness, how is he calling you to advance the kingdom in your home? And how are you actively participating in making your child a disciple of Jesus Christ? That's your call. Dad, that's your call too. So let's pray together.